Welcome to the Bond Online. My name is Eric, and in this video series I would like to introduce you how you can use the Microsoft Graph API to manage your Azure Active Directory. In this episode we're going to set up a connection with Azure Active Directory via the Graph API and retrieve all the users that are currently in the Azure Active Directory. The first thing we are going to do is from the portal go to Azure Active Directory, and then we're going to create a new enterprise application. And it will be explained why we need this in the later stage. You create a new application and you say create your own. Leave this as default. You can give it whatever you name you want, but in this case I will call it MS Graph API Connector. You click on create, and then you wait a sec until it's done. Then we go back to the Azure Active Directory and go to App Registrations. And there you see it there also created. If you click on all, there we have the Microsoft Graph API connector we just created earlier. You click on that. And the first thing we're going to do is grant this new application we created, or app registration we created, we're going to grant it API permissions. So click on that. In this case, we are going to use the API connector to read user accounts. So basically what we need is this new application we created to be able to have user read access. So we click on add permissions and you see several APIs. Of course, we're going to use the Graph API. In this case, you can select a delegate permission, but that's more if you use it for access for a web application. In our situation, we're going to use the application permission. The permissions we need is user read, because we want to read the user. So type in user. You see a lot of them. You see user export all, invite all, manage identities. In this case, we're going to use read all because we only want, in this case, to start with reading all the users from the Azure Active Directory. And of course, least privilege is always the best. So in this case, just use read all. The next thing we need to do is, after we've granted the user read all, is to give it admin consent. That means basically that an administrator needs to allow this application to be able to read the users, which basically makes sense. So in the Azure portal, an administrator needs to grant admin consent for this application to be able to use to read the users from this Azure Active Directory. You do that by having an administrator push this button, grant admin consent, and this basically tells you, well, this application is able to read the users within the Azure Active Directory. So you press yes, and you see it's granted. So our newly created application, Microsoft Graph API connector, is able to read the users from the Azure Active Directory. So after we've granted the API permission, the next thing we need to do is create a secret. And that's basically a sort of security you can use to access this application, which will connect to the Microsoft Graph connector. In this first video, we're going to use a secret. It's not the best security option currently, but we will use certificates in a later video. This is just to learn the basics. So in this case, we're going to create a new secret. You call it whatever you want, and it's also you can set an expiration date, like whatever, 3 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. In this case, we just leave it as recommended. So this secret or password will be valid for at least 6 months. So add. Okay, this is the only time you will see what actually basically the secret is. So the value is blah, blah. You can copy that. And the best thing to do is just hook it up to a notepad, which you can use later. Copy it to a notepad, which you probably won't see in this video, but it's definitely copied to a notepad. Okay. Basically, we're now currently done on the portal side. So what we're now going to do is switch to Visual Studio. So here in Visual Studio Code, you can see the script we are going to use to connect to the Graph API in Azure. You can just download the script via the link below if you want to use it. In this case, what the script will do is just get a connection with Azure AD, basically, and then it will read all the users that are currently in my test environment. I will go walk through the script for all the variables so you can see what actually is being used. But first we need to fill in some parameters, and I've added also some command lines where you can find it. So in this case, we need a client ID from the Graph API connector we created. We need a tenant name, and we need a client secret we created, and that's about it. Now, currently I have the secret already, so I can copy that in. And what we need to do is fill in the tenant name, which is online.dev, and we need the client ID. The client ID we can find in here. We have to go back to the Edge environment. We're going to do that. And if you look at the overview of the Graph API connector we just created, you can find here the client ID. So you need to copy that to your clipboard. Then you can switch back to your Visual Studio Code and you fill it in here. Okay. Basically, these are the parameters you need to fill in to get a connection. And the first thing we're going to do is see if we can get the connection working. That's basically this part, but you can see you have a client ID, you have a tenant name, the client secret. Now the resource is already filled in. So basically what we need to do to test if we receive a token, which is used later to get access to your Azure AD via the Graph API, you need to run the lines 1 until 26, or basically 13 until 26. You're going to select that. If you're not familiar with Visual Studio Code, you can press F8 to just run these lines. Okay, that has run. No errors, that's also always great. Now you can check if you have a token access, and just by typing in the variable token access. And you can see we have a token, at least we have a token available, which can be used in the later script to check, to basically use your Graph API command. So this part is basically used to get access to your application, which will access the Graph API. If you look back into your browser, you basically have a connection now with this connector, and the connector has API permission. So basically, you now made a connection to this connector, and you're able to use this connector to retrieve your users in this case. So now we go back to the Visual Studio Code. Okay, so we now have a token that's generated via the script. In the second part, I will go into detail in next videos what it means, but we're just going to use it to check if we are able to retrieve the users that are in our Active Directory. First, go back to the Azure portal just to see which user are we actually talking about, which accounts. When you go to here, you see there are some test accounts in it, like Adele Vance, Alex Wilbur. If you create a test environment via Microsoft, which is also in the link down below, you have the ability to generate some test users, and you probably are going to get these, which I've sent, which you see here. So if you go now back to the Visual Studio Code, we should be able to retrieve these user accounts. Go back to Visual Studio Code. And we're on this part of the script. This is basically getting the Azure AD users via Graph API. We'll go into detail in the next video about it, but it's just to demonstrate that we've created a connection with Azure AD via the Graph API. And if you just select line 28 or 32, press F8, and then we should have the users available in the users variable. And you can see here all the users. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope this video will be helpful. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.